some Republicans do not agree with the new right turn against IVF. We're gonna give you a little bit of what Matt Gaetz has to say about this.
The Republican Party cannot be the party against family formation. And when we're at the point where we're confusing like families like those you just had on with abortionists, like something is totally wrong. The people who want to have a family should have the government and the law on their side. And the notion that discarded embryos in IVF somehow turn these people who want children and want families and want the American dream into criminals is really wrong.
So for those in the Republican Party and the pro-life movement, as they describe themselves, who say that this is necessarily the next frontier, they're wrong.
Pro-life means being pro-IVF. You're always gonna find me on the side of family formation, not against family formation. I believe the Alabama legislature ought to amend their law so that IVF can occur safely in the Yellowhammer state.
Yeah, and he's right there. As he sometimes is. Matt Gaetz occasionally is right. He very rarely actually like analyzes the way that he's right and how it should potentially affect other things that he thinks. So for in this case, he's talking about that the government should be on the side of those who want IVF. They should also be on the side of people who want abortions, because many of those people also want to have children, want to plan families, just not necessarily when they're 17 or whatever, or when they've been sexually assaulted. So again, there's like a level of understanding, a level of empathy, but then it eventually hits the wall. The wall is only ever placed so far from them. But in this case, he's right, and he's not alone. Kellyanne Conway has been warning Republicans that they should not back bans or limitations on IVF. And you might think, well, why would she have already known to be advising them on this? Remember, right-wing pundits have been saying they want to come for IVF and surrogacy and birth control and the ability to choose who you marry for years, okay? They were never gonna be placated by Roe v. Wade, so there were certainly warning signs. So she was right, and now, probably to ward off some of the damage that's gonna be done to his presidential bid by the fact that he helped kill Roe v. Wade, Donald Trump has actually weighed in. And on the topic of IVF, he had this to say: under my leadership, the Republican Party will always support the creation of strong, thriving, healthy American families. We want to make it easier for mothers and fathers to have babies, not harder. That includes supporting the availability of fertility treatments like IVF in every capital S state in America. He goes on to describe accurately that the overwhelming majority of people who aren't religious loons support these. It's an incredibly radical position to be against this. And he goes on to call the Alabama legislature to act quickly to find an immediate solution. And then he goes on to say that IVF is an important part in life and we want the ultimate joy in life. And I get where he's coming from, because he's clearly a guy who draws so much pleasure from interacting with his children. He seems to deeply love them on a fundamental level. But look, jokes aside, they're all right here. Matt Gaetz, Kellyanne Conway, Donald Trump. I mean, they might be cynical, they might be doing it for political reasons, but at least they're advising Alabama to back off, and that seems like a good strategy to me. Waz, what do you think about that?
We might have millions of people watching this show, but you can be the difference maker, because we just need 1% of our audience to be paid members, and then this show can be around forever. So you can make that difference. Click join now.
This is just an obvious wrong here, but I'm only slightly tickled because of the fact that, we spend a lot of time in the discourse right now talking about democracy and the threat to democracy. This is democracy working for Alabama. The Republican Party is completely hegemonic over there. They do whatever the hell they want within state politics over there, and their constituents are ostensibly getting what they asked for. This is what they voted for. This is the people whom they've empowered. Obviously, it sucks that, the most marginalized people in the state have no protections against this tyranny, but this is democracy, folks. This is democracy working in Alabama.
I feel for the doctors in Alabama right now, because it's like what I was saying earlier, there's a lot of uncertainty with a lot of these things. And, whenever a state comes out with a law like this or any kind of ban or restriction, then immediately action has to be taken, because if immediate action isn't taken by a lot of these doctors and hospitals, then they're liable for whatever they do going forward. And I'm glad that you pointed out, John, how very, very fringe all of these anti-IVF people are. Even like Tommy Tuberville is extreme and very fringe, even for Donald Trump, even for Matt Gaetz, even for Kellyanne Conway. That is saying a lot. And I don't think that that should be overlooked by any means. And just the idea that someone could be so anti-science that something like IVF is seemingly not a good thing to them, it's really hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's incredibly fringe. I mean, it seems pretty common amongst independent right-wing media. They know as little about it as Tommy Tuberville, and so it's easy for them to take up those positions. The judge, the actual Supreme Court justice, the chief of the Alabama Supreme Court, if we were to like have them do a quiz on IVF, how it works, what it means, does anyone think that this person would pass? I don't know what you're thinking. It's hard to answer. I don't know anything about this judge. I've done research on the judge. You know who this person is? You might think, well, they're on the Supreme Court of a state. They clearly have to be an intellectual or something. No, he's a jackass. He's an absolute religious whack job. He goes on QAnon podcasts and he talks in his actual rulings about the holy wrath of God, which has the exact same level of connection to reality and the law as me basing my policy positions on my fear of the harsh stare of Sauron or the hexes of Snape. It has nothing to do with reality, nothing to do with the real world. Like if you invoke your religious fiction in a decision, that should be it. You should be off the court. It's madness. I love sci-fi and fantasy too, but if I were in a position of authority and I used like a quote from Worf in a decision, I would expect that would be my last day on the court, and we should have the same expectation for this absolute madman who believed that he could single-handedly take, well, not single-handedly, there was unfortunately more right-wingers on the court that agreed with him, but that they could strip away these rights without ever having any understanding of what actual effect that would have. Any final thoughts?
Well, I'm reading Dune right now, by the way. I meant to tell you earlier, but it is interesting because I told you I just started reading Dune. I was thinking about this last night, how we're having all these conversations with these really, really extreme religious views, and these views are treated in such a way that they're respectable within our government, and really they shouldn't be, because first of all, not everybody shares them. A lot of people don't share those views, and secondly, we act like we're such an advanced society, but the things that we say and talk about as a religious society, they're not very different from the things people were saying and talking about hundreds of years ago, So it's like, which one is it? Are we advanced? Have we made all these advancements in science? Are we better for it? Or are we still just, in the dark ages, just imagining things? And I mean, I don't want to offend anybody who, has some kind of reasonable religious ideas, but at the same time, it's like, you need to be able to separate, this is what's happening in the world. These are my beliefs, and this is what's governable. These are the things that we can use to actually govern an entire society full of people with different beliefs.
You guys know I'm nobody's religious person. I'm pretty staunchly atheist. However, we live in a country that is extremely deferential to the religious beliefs and the religious whims of folks, specifically those who are of Christian persuasion. I probably think we could blame the damn Puritans for that. But this is the result of that, man. We show so much deference to people in their hokey ass religious beliefs, and we let them go as far as possible with it, when in reality, you should be able to impose your religious nonsense on yourself. And maybe even your freaking kids, whatever. You want to indoctrinate your own kids into this nonsense? That's great. However, when you get in a position of authority and you are making legal rulings based on your crazy, wild religious interpretations, that's when we begin to have major problems.
100%, yeah. And to be clear, to follow on from what both of you said and what Yaz stressed, if you don't have the beliefs, that's fine. I know tons of Christians I absolutely love. My favorite person in the world, my grandfather, who tragically passed, was a liberal Christian, and his Christianity was actually attached to his value system. I have no problem with that. You can't legislate based on that. You can have it and you can legislate, but for good reasons. You can't do it for that reason. Like, I could say that I think we desperately need a universal basic income, because if we don't get it, then the great sandworms could rise up. But we don't get a universal basic income for that reason. I have to base it in something economic. That's all I'm asking for, really.